All right, so I recently...
What makes Avast Free Antivirus the best choice for your PC? 30 years of experience.
This guide is for beginners or for people that would like a refresher on how to build a computer. For those of you that already know how to build a computer, you may learn something from this guide, and for the absolute beginner, after watching this video, you should be able to build one on your own. If I had to compare it to something, your processor is like the heart of your computer. So with that in mind, the first thing you need to know is which processor are you going to buy? In order to find that out, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, what do I need this computer to do? If you're just going to search the internet, watch videos, and play games that aren't very demanding like League of Legends, Overwatch, or basically any other esports title, then you can settle for a lower end CPU like a Ryzen 3 1200 or an Intel i3. Now what I just said might confuse you, so here is a quick explanation. Those processors I just mentioned have a lower core count than most processors and have a low to medium range clock speed. Inside a processor, the more cores and threads you have, the stronger it will be and the more it will be able to handle. The clock speed of a processor kind of follows that same principle in that the higher the clock speed is, the stronger it will perform. Some programs and tasks are more demanding than others. For example, League of Legends could be run on a single-core processor, while advanced 4K video rendering and special effects would need 8 cores with a high clock speed to perform at the expectation. If you want the best processor for you, look up the game or programs that you plan on running with the phrase recommended requirements afterwards, and there should be plenty of articles or videos telling you which processor you should get. As the name implies, this part is to keep your processor cool. A processor gets very hot while performing tasks and needs help staying cool in order to keep doing so. Without a cooler, your processor would fry. Now, most processors have an automatic shutdown feature when they get too hot, but either way, you never want your processor to get there. There are two main ways to cool your processor, which are air cooling and liquid cooling. Both have their benefits, but for a beginner, I would recommend air cooling since it's a little bit easier to install. Now, some manufacturers sell CPU coolers with their processors, like AMD with their Ryzen chips. Most of the time these processors are sufficient, but if you plan on doing something like long-term gaming or extreme content creation, then I highly recommend getting a beefier cooler. Now, your motherboard is the main hub for your computer because this is where all the parts will get connected so that they can work together. There are many different motherboards to choose from, but after selecting your processor, there will only be a few specific models that you can use. The way you should think about this is as follows. Each processor belongs to a specific generation. Intel has processors that belong to a second generation. Okay, so because this is a beginner's guide, not going to go too crazy in depth on why we do certain
If you write anything on your computer,
things while we're building, but I just hope that you guys will trust what I'm saying has a reason behind it, and you should pretty much do it almost all the time unless there is some absolute genius in the comment section who says otherwise. We're taking our motherboard out of the anti-static bag and we're going to place it onto the box of the motherboard. The reason we put it on top of the box is because there are pins back here that we do not want to scratch or break. Plus, we don't have to worry about scratching up a table if we just put it here on the box. Static electricity is the #1 killer of computer components. I mean, maybe not the #1 killer, but it definitely can happen. If you are very nervous or scared about that happening to you, it is unlikely it does, but it can happen. You can get one of these. They're called anti-static wristbands. How they work: strap it onto your wrist, clamp this onto metal that would keep you grounded so that no static electricity can travel through your body. Unless you're dancing on carpet, in socks, you really shouldn't be worried about static electricity. But if you want peace of mind, they cost like $6. I'm not using this, I just thought I would show it to you just in case you want to get one. We're getting our processor. Sorry that mine's a little dirty, it's used. I got an i5-6400 from Intel. This is a 6th generation processor and its socket type is 1151. This motherboard is a Z170 by, I think, Gigabyte? Yeah, by Gigabyte. Based off of those numbers, I personally know that this motherboard is an 1151 socket and supports 6th generation and up to 7th generation Intel processors. If you want to know, just off the top of your head like I do, what I highly recommend you do is search what generation processor is compatible with what motherboards. Now, because this is a Z170, the Z indicates to me that this motherboard is overclockable. This processor is not overclockable. Some of you might think that's a waste of money, but like all my other parts, I got this used for a very good deal. So I'm using what I have available to me. Now, we're going to take the clamp off of the CPU socket. We'll just lift this back. It's not sensitive at all, don't worry about it. Now we're going to place our processor in the socket. How do we know which way it goes? It's a square. Well, if you look on the processor, there's always a little arrow that points where it should line up. On the motherboard, there's another arrow. So we're going to gently drop from like point blank range our processor into that socket. It's not correctly lined up yet. There it is. Now notice I didn't push it, I didn't tamper with it or mess with it because there are pins that connect the CPU to the socket. You never, ever, ever, ever force the processor into the socket. You should just be able to gently place it in there. If you feel like you have to force it or it's not sitting in all the way and laying flat seated, there's something wrong. One of the pins are bent. You're gonna have to do your best to straighten it out. But since that isn't the case for me, I get to now put the clamp on and firmly keep our processor in place. Next thing we're doing, these are the RAM slots. Because motherboards these days are fairly nice, this isn't just, painted red and painted black to fit the color scheme. I mean, it does do that. But you'll see these are dual channel RAM slots. Now I could go on about that, but just know that because they're color coded, if you get a dual set of RAM sticks, which you typically should, you will place the RAM sticks into the corresponding colors. Since I know I'm going to be working with a fairly large air cooler, I'm going to give myself a little bit of space, and I'm going to take the RAM sticks that I have here, and I will line up the pins and gently place them in here. This CPU cooler is going to be pretty large, so I want to give myself that extra little bit of space if I need it. So you look at the brackets, there should always be a way to open them. This side does not pop open, so it's a one side open for the bracket. Most new motherboards work like that. And I'm gently placing it in the DIMM slot, is what we call this, and pushing it all the way in until I hear that click. Both sides. Now I know that my RAM is correctly placed inside the DIMM slot. And push it in until I hear that on both sides. So now that I know my RAM is correctly placed inside the motherboard. Next thing we're moving on to is the case. Put this to the side. Now, you might be wondering, why does this case have a see-through panel? Well, tempered glass and looking inside your build these days is kind of a trend. It's very popular. It looks nice, I like my cases that way. If you want to get one that way, there should be a lot of cases like that for you to choose from. So looking inside this case, again, this is used. Yours will be brand new. They'll have the case wires wrapped up nicely for you. This case is a nicer one. It's by Corsair. I don't remember the specific model name off the top of my head. I know it's an expensive one. This one comes pre-installed with nice Corsair cases. 2 in the front, 1 in the back. Now what we're looking to do is mount our motherboard inside this case so that we can continue building. But the first thing you want to do, because I always forget this step whenever I'm building by myself, that IO shield that came with your motherboard, this little thing, you're going to pop this in and you're going to place it in between the case and the motherboard. If you want, a nice and easy way to do it would be to kind of place your motherboard in the case and try to pay attention to where these line up with the outputs of your motherboard. I can tell that mine are going to go in this way. And I'm going to pop this in here through the side. Now I know you're not getting a good angle, but what I want you guys to know is that when you are putting this thing in, it's a little rectangular shape. It's got these little silver wedges on the outside that are meant for you to pop in to the case, and when you get it right, you should hear a little pop. Still push, see, like that. See, I'm pushing. Oh, there we go. Now I can seat my motherboard. Now some cases will make you screw in these little raised bits before you can screw down your motherboard. So that's where I know I'll be able to put a screw through my motherboard to line up with these little screw bits. I've got 6 here. I could definitely put in another one. I'm a little bit lazy. I usually don't put in every single screw through to my motherboard. You probably should do that, and I'm showing you bad practice. So I'm making sure that my outputs on the motherboard line up with the I/O shield, getting all the case cables out of the way first. Make sure that they're pushed through the side. And what I'm checking for here is to see if the outputs on the motherboard are going through the I/O shield correctly and that the holes line up correctly so that I can screw through into the case. Most cases will come with a bag full of screws. Not most, all should. And what you're gonna look for is the screw that it's got a circular base with a hexagon screw head. And it works with a regular Phillips head screw or screwdriver. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna put this screw in right where I see the hole lines up. We'll start in the corner, gently trying to get the screw in there. And it's threading. So now I'm just gonna screw that down until it doesn't go any further. Perfect. Now I've got one down. Now what you want to do when you're screwing these down is you want to go on diagonals if you can, because what's going to happen with motherboards, especially if you're working with smaller micro ATX motherboards, is that if I just started screwing all on one side,